Hi, this is Tracy Rhodes from the Speech Communication Studies at TCC Northeast, and I'm delighted to share with you about the life of Corrie ten Boom. So she is born towards the end of the 1800s, and she lives in Holland, which is in the Netherlands. Okay, shares a border with Germany, and that's going to be important later on. So the interesting thing about Corrie is she had a fairly uneventful life for 50 years. She was raised in this sweet family, had a happy childhood, mom, dad, siblings. They were a family of faith, which is really important to her story, so hang on to that. And then she did have a little heartbreak early on as a young woman. She got jilted, wanted to marry a man, and his mother didn't approve of her. So also tuck that away in your memory, because that kind of blows your mind when you know her whole story. So she got jilted and she just embraced, okay, well, I'm not going to be a wife, but let me carry on. And she went on to become Holland's first licensed watchmaker. And remember, this is 1930s, so this is kind of a crazy time for women to be really nailing the career. So she's got her quiet, sweet, calm, happy life, and then the Nazis invade. 1940s, early 1940s, they push into the Netherlands. And here's where her life takes a really hard left turn. She is 50, never been married, never been a mom. You could basically call her like a Sunday school teacher. And she starts hiding away and saving Jews from the Nazis. And here's in the story where I just am in awe of her, because I'm about the age that she was. And I think at this moment in my life, could I risk everything I have to save somebody from an authority who could take my life? I don't know. I really don't know if I have that in me. And so to look at somebody like she didn't grow up with a hard childhood, on the streets, She didn't have a tough exterior. She's this sweet little sheltered, kind lady, single lady, and she just decides, I have to save these people. I have to help these people. She becomes part of the Dutch underground, and she's doing all kinds of shenanigans, hiding from the Nazis and getting like ration cards and farming out. She got this little network of people, and they saved all these babies who were going to be killed by the Nazis. Just a stunning woman. Then they get found out, they get betrayed by somebody that she thought she could trust. Somebody came to her for help. He's like, hey, can you help me? My wife's been arrested. And she said yes, and he went and ratted her out to the Nazis. So deep, deep betrayal. Her whole family's arrested. She's put 3 months into solitary confinement. Okay, so just pause and think about that. You're 50 years old. All your family is arrested and you were put in a cell for 3 months because she had pleurisy. So she's sick and alone. And solitary confinement, we know the psychology of really how devastating that can be. And she actually kind of wins over the heart of the guy who's put as a judge before her. And she could have been condemned to die right then. And he kind of made a way for her to just stay in prison and not die. So, I mean, her story just gets like all of these crazy twists and turns. So she recovers to where she cannot be in solitary anymore. Ultimately, she goes to 3 different prisons. One of them is Ravensbrück, run by the Nazis, really horrific. Through all of this confinement at the hands of the Nazis, her dad dies, her sister dies. Later, she finds out her brother has passed. She has a nephew she never sees again. So you can start lining up the heartaches, and you can see how a human would just kind of start to die a little inside and just be bitter and closed off and shut down. And this lady doesn't. She just keeps, the whole time she's incarcerated in this concentration camp, she's reading a Bible. She's leading in praise services and worship services. She still has that softness and that kindness. And I'm like, I don't know how. After all you've been through, the horrors that you've seen. So her sister dies while they're in Ravensbrück, and then her number gets called. They wouldn't call them by names. They had to dehumanize, so they called her number. And she didn't know, was she being sent to work in the field? Was she being sent to the gas chambers? And by some crazy miracle that's also called a clerical error, they're like, well, you're done, you're released, you're out. And they gave her this old set of clothes, and they handed her a sheet of paper that was like her release papers. And she walks out of Ravensbrück concentration camp. Didn't know it at the time, didn't know why. I mean, she's a woman of faith, so I'm sure she's like, yay, God, thank you. Come to find out, all the women her age 1 week later were terminated, were killed in that camp. All right, so, and I looked it up, and Ravensbrück is about 450 miles from her home. So then just think, okay, I'm free, and I'm in Germany, and she had to figure out a way to make her way back home, and she did. Okay, and here's the clincher. So she's free, the war ends, she sets up a home, like a facility, to help rehabilitate the Dutch who were Nazi sympathizers, to reintegrate them into society. She wants to, hold on to this, she wants to help them come to terms with what they did and how they turned on their fellow Dutch people, and kind of get into a place of forgiveness and be back in society. I'm just thinking, if I had been through all these steps of hell, I don't think my first instinct would be, how can I help the people who betrayed my family? But she did. Part of that was her sister's vision, and so she carried it out. And she went on later to forgive the man who turned her family in. And she went on to forgive the guard who had been horrific to her sister. He contacted her, and she was able to forgive him. And so really the takeaway from Corrie ten Boom is the impact of her family, her parents, her faith. They just taught her to be this amazing human, and she always was. So that, which is also similar, by the way, to Mother Teresa. She said before she died, everything she learned about loving people, she learned from her mom and dad. So, I mean, parents everywhere. It matters what you teach these babies. Anyway, the second half of that is forgiveness. She's the poster child in humanity for forgiving people who've hurt you. And that's something I struggle with. That's hard, you know? That's an everyday, like, I don't know, like that really hurt. And I'm, even something on the highway, people cut you off and you're like, you don't really want to forgive them. Other things in life, you may be angry at an instructor. Like, you really graded that paper harshly, or upset with your boss, or maybe a romantic partner that hurt you. And when you know Corrie's story, he's like, if she can forgive all the pain and suffering and heartache, then other people can too. So we all need a little bit more of that in our life. And that's why I have tremendous respect and affection for Corrie ten Boom.
My name is Isaiah Atel. I'm a TCC dual credit student. And my favorite woman who was a trailblazer in women's history was Mrs. Katherine Johnson. There's a little backstory behind why I enjoy Mrs. Johnson so much. When I was in about the 5th grade, my mother used to take me to the Amon Card Museum located near DFW Airport. And I'm real big with aquatics and fish, and I've never been a big fan of things that were in the sky. But I didn't want to be mean to my mom, so I would go. And one time, we were there, and they had a guest speaker. At the time, I didn't know who Miss Johnson was or what we were really doing, but she was talking about all her struggles and how she became a member of the NASA team that helped with trajectory and calculations. And funny thing was, during the middle of her speech, my alarm clock rang, and the whole auditorium looked at me, and I stood up, And my mom was just saying, go out the room, turn your phone off. And I'm pretty sure she acknowledged me at that point, because after her speech, she talked to me, and we had a nice little conversation. I was happy she didn't bring up the phone alarm. And I'm from Texas, so I had a little rooster alarm that would go off, and it sounded just like a rooster at 6 a.m. Be like the and it went off like a good minute straight because I didn't know it was my phone because she was talking. And a few of Miss Johnson's accomplishments were she was with NASA from 1953 to 1986. She was born in August of 1918, and she sadly passed away in February the 24th in 2020. And what I'll say is, here's a quote if you don't remember anything from what I've said today, is sometimes you gotta take a step to make a leap, and sometimes you gotta fall a few times to get up and take a step. And after you make that first step, you can start running, just like Miss Johnson did.
My name is Grant Griffin, math instructor at TCC Northeast Campus, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my favorite female mathematician, Mariam Mirzakhani. Um, she was born in Iran, Tehran to be exact, in May 12th, 1977. That's an important date. I want you to remember that. This was right before the Iran-Iraq War of the 80s. It took up most of the 80s, and um, it's well documented how difficult times were for her and her family. But her father, being an electrical engineer, was extremely supportive of her and the family, and always encouraged her to find something fulfilling to do with her life. And by the time she got to high school, it was pretty evident that she was gifted in mathematics. In fact, in 1994 and 95, she won the gold medal in the International Mathematic Olympiads. And in 95, she actually scored a perfect score. So in high school, very prolific. This was the first of many awards and recognitions that she would get over her lifetime. Um, Now, after high school, she went on to Sharif University of Technology in her hometown of Tehran and earned a bachelor's of Science degree in mathematics in 1999. After her bachelor's degree, she left Iran and moved to the States, where she went to Harvard University and completed a PhD in mathematics in 2004. Um, Mariam was well known for her creative slant on things in the mathematics world, and she liked to study abstract spaces. So the geometry that everyone knows and loves from high school is known as Euclidean geometry, and she specialized in a type of non-Euclidean geometry. It's an abstract space called hyperbolic geometry. That's what her thesis was on. Um, After attaining her PhD in mathematics in 2004, she then became a Clay Mathematics Institute Research Fellow at Princeton, and she was also an assistant professor there. That was from 2004 through 2008, so not too long ago. And um, it was actually after 2008 that she then got picked up by Stanford, and Stanford wanted her to become a full professor out in California. So she went on to do that, and very soon after was given some awards for the work that she had done in her doctoral study. In 2009, she won the Blumenthal Award, which is awarded every 4 years for an individual that shows promise in the area of mathematics based on their thesis. So this idea of non-Euclidean geometry is an important research field in mathematics today. And in 2013, she then went on to win the Ruth Lytle Satter Prize, which is awarded every 2 years specifically to a woman for her outstanding contributions in the area of mathematics. She specifically at the time was working on her theories of moduli spaces of Riemann surfaces, again in the realm of non-Euclidean geometries. And probably what Miriam is most well known for is winning the Fields Medal in 2014. The Fields Medal, for those that are unaware of this, it is like the Nobel Prize in the mathematics world. It's a really big deal to win the Fields Medal. Not only did she win the Fields Medal, she is the first Iranian to win the Fields Medal, and she is the first female to ever win the Fields Medal. So a really big deal. She won the Fields Medal for dynamics and geometry of Riemann surfaces and their moduli spaces, which she was already getting recognized for as early as 2013. Unfortunately, Miriam's career was cut short. She ended up passing away in 2017 due to breast cancer. So in 2018, it was proposed and approved that May 12th would be the International Day for Celebrating Women in Mathematics in honor of Miriam.
My name is Jordan Schmelzer. I am a student at TCC Northeast, and my feminist icons are the radium girls. So, at the turn of the 20th century, radium and its potential uses were discovered by another female icon, Marie Curie, and unbeknownst at the time were the fatal side effects of the element. Due to this, the use of radium permeated every level of society. It was introduced in medicine and treating cancer. It was used in household objects like toothpaste, hair cream, and even food because it was just viewed as a miracle element. So after this, female factory workers at the beginning of World War I began to pick up well-paying positions painting watch and dial faces that would glow in the dark for the US military. They were assured that their concerns about the direct exposure to a relatively foreign element were baseless and specifically requested to wet the brush that they used to paint the faces between their lips to make it more precise after every single watch face. So effectively, they ingested copious amounts of radium over what was in some cases decades-long careers. These women actually became known as the ghost girls because they quite literally glowed from within after their shifts. These women were so trusting of their supervisors and subsequently unaware of the deadly nature of radium that they even painted their teeth so that they would leave with a signature shining smile. One of the first women to suffer the consequences was Amelia Molly Magia, whose toothache progressed to the overall necrosis of her jaw, resulting in its removal. She eventually died of radium-related complications in 1922, which is 2 years after it was implemented in factories, and her death was labeled due to syphilis at the time. It was a further insult to injury as society had a very negative view of STDs and looked down on those diagnosed. Over the following 2 years, the uptick of health complications amongst the factory workers increased exponentially, and the operators dismissed this entirely. On government levels, they censored the media. They even conducted a private study that never saw the light of day. Finally, in 1925, findings were released that conclusively proved radium was to blame for the woman's ailments. The factories tried to shut these down, but the women lawyered up and started to see their days in court in 1927. The military denied any involvement, further complicating their legal battles and marginalizing the woman, and they had to spend their last months, weeks, and days in the courtroom fighting for recognition for themselves and their families and protections for the young ladies still working the lines. For the first time in 1938, over a decade later, judgment was rendered for radium girl Catherine Wolfe Donahue in her lawsuit against the Radium Dial Company for health complications after the near decade of radium exposure she endured. This precedent allowed many women to receive some form of compensation themselves, but much of the damages went towards paying for attorney fees and funeral arrangements. Despite this horrendously tragic end, the rights that they fought for with their lives still benefit us to this day. It is because of them that females' place in the courtroom was affirmed and accepted, companies can now be held liable for their conduct, and factory reform was implemented.
Hello, this is Dr. Corey DITSLEAR. I am a professor in the government department here at TCC Northeast Campus, and I wanted to talk to you today about one of my women heroes. I actually have quite a few women heroes, people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Maya Angelou, uh, Michelle Obama, but the person at the top of my list is actually Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was First Lady of the United States when her husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was president. And that's what most people know her for. But she was an important political figure for the United States and the world in her own right. Her activism started at a very young age when she was a suffragette and advocated for the right for women to vote. She was advocated for veterans' rights, for the veterans who had returned from wars. Later in her life, she advocated on behalf of the civil rights movement. She advocated for women to have more opportunities in public life, including women in the workforce, especially during World War II, when she early on encouraged women to go out and apply for the jobs that men weren't doing because they were off at war, basically promoting the promotion that ended up becoming the Rosie the Riveter campaign. And she was also the first lady to really step out of the behind the scenes role that most first ladies had taken on prior to the 1930s when she was first lady. Most first ladies were not engaged in any politics themselves. They were there to have teas with the wives of other world leaders. They would host dinners, maybe, handshakes and greetings along with their president, but they didn't do things on their own necessarily. But with Eleanor Roosevelt, we have the advent of the modern first lady. Pretty much ever since Eleanor Roosevelt, all first ladies have taken on roles where they advocate for issues that are important to them in the public, and not only in the public sphere, but also in terms of in government itself. And so they would advocate for the specific issues that they feel are important. Not always successfully, however. Even Eleanor Roosevelt ran into roadblocks with respect to civil rights. She was pushed for the advancement of civil rights, especially for African Americans, at a much earlier date than even her husband was willing to push for in terms of actual policy. Since Eleanor Roosevelt, we've had people like Michelle Obama advocating for young women gaining more access to government, to public life. We've had literacy programs for the Bushes. Hillary Clinton advocated strongly for healthcare around the world, and especially healthcare for women and the recognition of women around the world as being leaders. Back to the 1970s, where we had issues related in 70s and 80s. Issues were promoted by first ladies, included, anti-drug programs and drug rehabilitation programs. So Eleanor Roosevelt basically brought in a new era for first ladies being able to push their own ideas as part of governance, and to the point where even many of them have promoted and been behind specific laws that either have been gone into effect or at least attempts had been made on them. And all of that is because of Eleanor Roosevelt. But to me, the most important thing that Eleanor Roosevelt occurred after she was no longer First Lady. After her husband died, she did not leave public life. In fact, President Truman appointed her as ambassador to the United Nations for the United States, one of the very early on, and she was charged with at the United Nations with being the chair of the committee that was going to write a brand new Bill of Rights for the world, which we call the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In doing so, she turned to her old advocacy and contacts she had made there, and along with a number of women and from other countries and other men from other countries, as well as inviting in some of her friends from groups like the ACLU and the NAACP to help write this document that has led to a number of world treaties related to especially human rights, both economic rights as well as personal rights and freedoms. And so we end up with a Bill of Rights for the world called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, written in part through the leadership of Eleanor Roosevelt. Today, we have two major human rights conventions that are treaties, which include things like freedom of movement across country borders, refugee rights, women's rights, rights of differently abled people, rights, civil rights for minority groups in countries. All of that came out of that first writing back in the mid to late 1940s. That was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, led by Eleanor Roosevelt. So to me, Eleanor Roosevelt is the mother of our world rights documents. And that's what makes her the most important hero to me. Thank you, and hope you take some time maybe to learn more about Eleanor Roosevelt and other women who have played important roles in the United States and the world.
My name is PRESLEE WALDMAN, and I'm a dual credit student at Birdville High School. And the woman I choose to talk about is RHODES. She is ancient Greece, so a little while ago, and people don't actually know if she was real or if she's just a myth made up, but she is the first female midwife. Back then, a lot of medical professionals were only male. Female women could not study it. So she disguised herself as a man and got into a really well medical school and actually studied under a very famous practitioner who was Hephaestus. He was very famous and came up with a lot of medical inventions. She did come from a wealthy family, so it's not like even if she was a man, getting into a school like this would have been so easy for her. But back then, there's a lot of high mortality rate and childbirth, and just for women in general and their overall health care. And going to the doctor's office is scary, and nobody wants a man doing it. But she would disguise herself as a man to, learn medicine, practice about it. And then when she started getting clients, they wouldn't want her to do it on her because she looks like a man. But then she would reveal herself that she was actually a woman. And so she started gaining all this popularity and all these clients, and all the other men doctors would be so jealous of her and be like, how are you getting all them? So they just assumed that, they're seducing the clients, like he's sleeping with them. Like, of course, because that's the first thing that men think. So they ended up taking her to trial. So saying that she's sleeping with her clients. Well, because I thought she was a man. But on trial, she revealed herself and was like, no, I'm a woman. Like, that's how I'm getting all these clients, because no girl wants you touching them. And so the men, of course, tried sentencing her to death. But all these women clients came up and started protesting for her, and that's actually how her story has been known, is because of the clients. But yeah, she was brought into trial, and she was alive. And just this helped a lot of women stand up for her, and this allowed more women to practice medicine, but they made the rule only could practice on female women. And this just shows, like, even now today, for women, it's hard in any career field, especially medicine. I've even been told, like, because I've wanted to pursue medicine, and that, like, trying to be a doctor or something is harder for women, because I've even been said, oh, that's like your egg-bearing years, you shouldn't do that. And I'm like, yeah, it's great that women can bring children in the world, but there's, like, women also have a brain, and there's more to that than just bearing children. So yeah, she was kind of stood out to me, and she has a great story, and it just shows that women could do more no matter how they look.